Before we step into this tale of love, tell us where you're watching from, and if it touches your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe to Black Millionaire Love Stories. Chapter 1. The Weight of Debts. The eviction notice trembled in Leora Banks' fingers, the bold red final warning bleeding through the paper like her own tears threatened to spill. Rain pummeled the cracked window pane of her tiny Chicago apartment, matching the storm in her chest. 30 days, she whispered, her voice catching. 30 days before I'm homeless. At 20, Leora had never imagined inheriting nothing but debts from her father. Leonard Banks had been charming enough to borrow from everyone before drinking himself to death 3 months ago. Now debt collectors circled daily, expecting payment for her father's sins. Her phone buzzed with her best friend Serena's name. "Any luck with the job hunt?" Serena asked when Leora answered. "Nothing. I've applied everywhere. Nobody wants a community college dropout with no experience." Leora sank onto her worn couch. "I might have something different," Serena paused. "There's this posting online, a caretaker position for some rich guy in Lake Forest, paralyzed from an accident. Full-time, live-in. The pay is insane, like, wipe out all your daddy's debts insane." Leora's breath caught. "I don't have medical training. The ad says they'll train you. You just need to be strong enough to help move him and, do personal care stuff." "Personal care?" Leora's voice rose. "You mean like bathing him? Girl, you need this money or not? Those loan sharks your daddy borrowed from aren't exactly patient types." As if summoned, a harsh knock rattled her door. She froze, recognizing Darius' distinctive 3-beat pattern, her father's most persistent debt collector. "I'll call you back," she whispered. The knocking grew louder. "I know you're in there, little Banks. Your daddy owed me 15 grand, and interest is ticking. Text me the contact info," she messaged Serena, her decision made. The mansion loomed before her, a sprawling testament to wealth Leora had only seen in movies. Lake Michigan stretched behind it as she parked her rusted Honda beside luxury vehicles worth more than her entire life. Mrs. Caldwell, the stern-faced house manager, led her through a maze of hallways to double doors of dark wood. "Mr. Elias has reviewed your application. His accident was 2 years ago, and he's gone through 17 caretakers since then." 17. Leora's stomach clenched. "His condition requires assistance with personal care, medication, therapy exercises, and sometimes emotional support during pain episodes." Mrs. Caldwell's expression softened marginally. "He was different before the accident, driven but kind. Now," she shook her head, "well, you'll see." The room beyond was a vast office with one wall entirely of glass overlooking the storm-lashed lake. Leora's breath caught in her throat. Jackson Elias didn't look defeated. Despite being confined to a wheelchair, authority radiated from him like electricity. He was perhaps 30, with rich mahogany skin several shades lighter than her own, his face all striking angles and commanding presence. A precisely trimmed beard accentuated a jaw that spoke of stubborn determination, but it was his eyes that truly captured her, dark and penetrating, blazing with intelligence and veiling a pain that resonated with something deep inside her. "So, you're the desperate one," he said, his voice deep and smooth like aged bourbon. Leora straightened her spine. "I'm Leora Banks." "Yes. I've reviewed your background check. Your father borrowed from half of Chicago before drinking himself into an early grave. His bluntness felt like a slap. Now you're drowning in his debts." Heat rushed to her cheeks. "My financial situation is, your motivation," he interrupted, wheeling himself around the desk. "I need someone who won't quit when things get challenging. Desperation inspires commitment." He stopped directly before her, looking up with those penetrating eyes. This close, she could see flecks of amber in the darkness of his irises, could smell his subtle cologne, sandalwood, and something uniquely him. "The job requires intimate care, bathing, dressing, sometimes managing bodily functions when my condition flares. Does that make you uncomfortable? His question was a challenge. Leora swallowed hard but held his gaze. I'm not afraid of hard work, Mr. Elias. Something flickered across his face, surprise perhaps. I can learn whatever I need to learn, she continued. And yes, I need this job. But that doesn't mean I'll let anyone treat me like I'm nothing. Mrs. Caldwell gasped softly behind her, but Leora kept her eyes locked on Jackson's. For a long moment, tension crackled between them. Then, unexpectedly, one corner of his mouth lifted. Not quite a smile, but a crack in his cold facade. My last caretaker lasted 4 days before crying her way out, he said. The one before that stole a watch worth more than your car. Why should I believe you're different? Because I have more at stake than just a paycheck. I have my father's mistakes to fix and my own future to save. Jackson studied her for another long moment. Then he nodded once. Mrs. Caldwell will show you to your quarters. You start tonight. I need assistance at 8. He turned his wheelchair back toward the windows, dismissing her. Don't make me regret this, Miss Banks. As Mrs. Caldwell guided her from the room, Leora glanced back once. Jackson sat silhouetted against the stormy lake, a solitary figure surrounded by wealth, yet utterly alone. Something about the image tugged at her heart despite his coldness. Little did she know that behind her, Jackson's eyes had followed her departure, lingering on the door long after it closed. For the first time since his accident, something had broken through his fog, the defiant light in her eyes, the proud tilt of her chin despite circumstances that should have crushed her spirit. For the first time in 2 years, Jackson Elias felt a flicker of something dangerous awaken within him, something that felt disturbingly like interest. Her suite turned out to be larger than her entire apartment, with a plush king bed, private bathroom with a tub deep enough to swim in, and a sitting area with a small library. These will be your uniforms, Mrs. Caldwell said, opening a closet to reveal sets of simple but expensive navy scrubs. After reviewing medication schedules and therapy routines, Mrs. Caldwell finally left her alone. Leora sank onto the bed, its softness unlike anything she'd ever experienced, and pulled out her phone. 3 missed calls from debt collectors. 1 text from Serena, did you get it? Yes. Starting tonight. This place is insane. Serena's response came instantly, OMG, how hot is he? Rich, paralyzed guys are totally romance novel material. Leora almost laughed. It's not like that. He's intense, complicated. I'm here to do a job. At 8, she knocked on Jackson's bedroom door, heart hammering. Enter, came his deep voice. The bedroom was spacious and masculine with dark woods and deep blues. Jackson sat in his wheelchair beside a window, watching the storm. Mrs. Caldwell explained your evening routine, Leora said, fighting to keep her voice steady. Would you like to begin with your medications or therapy stretches first? Jackson turned, his dark eyes finding hers in the dimly lit room. For a moment, he simply looked at her as though surprised she had actually returned. Stretches first, he finally said, the pain is worse today with the weather. As she positioned herself beside him, Jackson's scent enveloped her. Her hands trembled slightly as she prepared to touch him for the first time. I won't break, Miss Banks, he said, his voice low. And neither will you. Their eyes met, something unspoken passing between them. Then, with strength that surprised her, Leora helped him from the wheelchair onto the bed. His body was solid against hers for the brief moment of transfer, the heat of him burning through her scrubs. Once positioned, she began the prescribed stretches for his legs, carefully manipulating each limb. You have strong hands, he commented as she worked, his voice strangely soft. My father used to get cramps from withdrawal, she answered without thinking. I learned how to work them out. She felt him tense. I'm sorry. That was too personal. No, he said after a pause. It was honest. I prefer honesty to awkward politeness. How did it happen? Your accident. Lightning illuminated the room briefly. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. "I jumped into Lake Michigan during a storm," he finally said. "A boy had fallen from his father's boat. The impact with the water damaged my spinal cord." Leora's hands stilled. "You saved him." Jackson's eyes met hers, something vulnerable flashing before disappearing. "Yes, he lived. I paid the price." "That was brave," she said softly. "That was foolish," he countered. "I was a different man then, believing myself invincible. The world has a way of correcting such delusions." Without thinking, she squeezed his leg gently, though she knew he couldn't feel it. "Maybe it wasn't a delusion," she said. "Maybe that boy is alive because of exactly who you are." Jackson's eyes widened fractionally, genuine surprise crossing his features before he masked it. "The stretches are complete," he said, his tone businesslike once more. "Now the medications." Later, as she helped him back into his wheelchair, their hands accidentally touched. A jolt of electricity shot through her fingers, causing her breath to catch. Jackson looked up sharply, his eyes meeting hers. For one heartbeat, then two, they remained frozen, the air between them suddenly thick with something neither could name. "Good night, Miss Banks," he finally said, his voice husky. "Good night, Mr. Elias," she whispered as she slipped out into the hallway, her heart racing inexplicably. Leora leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. She had come here desperate for money, for escape from her father's legacy. She hadn't expected to find a man who awakened something inside her, something that recognized the strength beneath his pain, as if they were two halves of the same resilient spirit. Chapter 2. Walls of Glass. Dawn broke over Lake Michigan, casting golden light across Leora's new bedroom. For a moment, she forgot where she was. The luxurious sheets felt foreign against her skin. Then reality crashed back as her phone vibrated with another debt collector's message. 3 days had passed since she'd started working for Jackson Elias, 3 days of learning his routines, memorizing medication schedules, and navigating the invisible walls he'd built around himself. The man was an enigma wrapped in thorns, sometimes coldly professional, other times watching her with an intensity that made her skin tingle. "You're still here," Mrs. Caldwell remarked that morning as Leora prepared Jackson's breakfast tray. "That's longer than the last 2 lasted." Leora arranged the protein-rich meal carefully. "I'm not easily scared off." "It's not fear that drives them away," Mrs. Caldwell said, her voice softening. "It's him, the way he pushes people until they break." "Maybe he's the one who's broken," Leora murmured, not realizing she'd spoken aloud until Mrs. Caldwell's eyebrows shot up. She found Jackson in his office, already dressed in a crisp shirt and tailored pants, the wheelchair positioned before floor-to-ceiling windows. Rain had given way to sunshine, the lake beyond shimmering like scattered diamonds. "Good morning," she said, setting down the tray. He didn't turn. "You're 3 minutes late." Leora bit her tongue against a sharp retort. "I'm sorry. I was discussing your medication schedule with Mrs. Caldwell." "Were you?" Finally, he swiveled to face her, those midnight eyes assessing her. "Were you discussing me?" Heat rushed to her cheeks. Had he heard them? "Your physical therapist called," she said instead of answering. "He can't make it today. Family emergency." Frustration flashed across Jackson's face. "Of course not. God forbid professionals actually keep their commitments." "I could help," Leora offered impulsively. "Mrs. Caldwell showed me the basic exercises." Jackson's eyes narrowed. "You think you can replace a trained specialist?" "No," she replied evenly. "But I think something is better than nothing, and you know it." Their eyes locked in silent battle. Something shifted in his gaze, a flicker of respect perhaps. "Fine," he finally said, after lunch. The rehabilitation room occupied the mansion's eastern wing, a space filled with specialized equipment and floor-to-ceiling mirrors. Leora helped Jackson from his wheelchair onto the padded table, hyper-aware of his body against hers during the transfer. Despite his condition, his upper body remained powerfully built, his arms corded with muscle from navigating the wheelchair. "We'll start with passive stretches," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "Then resistance exercises for the parts you can control." Jackson watched her in the mirrors as she began manipulating his legs, his expression guarded. "Where did you learn to be so comfortable with the human body? Most people your age are awkward, embarrassed. When you grow up poor, privacy is a luxury," she answered honestly. "And when your father's an alcoholic, you learn to handle bodies pretty quickly." His eyes met hers in the mirror. "Did he hurt you?" The question surprised her with its directness, its hint of concern. "Not physically," she said after a moment. "His weapon was disappointment, broken promises." She rotated his ankle gently, focusing on the motion rather than the unexpected vulnerability of their conversation. "What about your mother?" he asked. "Cancer when I was 8. Leora moved to his other leg, her hands maintaining their gentle strength. "Dad started drinking heavily after that. Said he couldn't bear looking at me because I had her eyes. Every time he saw me, he remembered what he'd lost." She hadn't meant to reveal so much, but there was something about him that drew truth from her. Perhaps the recognition of similar wounds beneath different scars. "My mother left when I was 12, Jackson said unexpectedly, his voice taking on a distant quality. "Decided my father's money wasn't worth his controlling nature. Packed her things while I was at school. Left nothing but a note that I wasn't supposed to see." Leora's hand stilled momentarily on his calf. "Did you read it?" "Every word," he admitted, a hint of the abandoned boy visible briefly in his eyes. "She said she loved me but couldn't breathe in that house anymore, that she'd suffocated a little more each day." "I'm sorry," she said softly. "Don't be. She made her choice." His jaw tightened, "just like everyone else in my life." The bitterness in his voice made her heart ache. "Not everyone leaves, Mr. Elias. Don't they?" His gaze was challenging in the mirror. "People stay when they need something, money, power. What they don't do is stay for a crippled man with rage issues. Is that what you think you are?" Her voice sharpened as she moved to stand beside his head, forcing him to look directly at her instead of through the mirror. "A crippled man with rage issues? It's what I know I am," he countered. 17 caretakers in 2 years isn't a coincidence. Maybe you haven't found the right one." The words escaped before she could stop them, hanging in the air between them. Something dangerous flickered in Jackson's eyes. For a heartbeat, the air felt charged, electric with unspoken possibilities. Then pain contorted his features, breaking the moment. His hand shot out, gripping her wrist with surprising strength as a muscle spasm seized his back. "Breathe through it," she urged, her free hand moving instinctively to his shoulder, massaging the knotted muscle. "Focus on my voice." His fingers remained locked around her wrist, his breathing ragged as the spasm peaked. Leora continued the gentle pressure on his shoulder, leaning closer until she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. "When I was little and couldn't sleep," she said softly, "my mother would sing to me. Said music could heal anything." Without overthinking, she began to sing, a low, sweet melody her mother had once used to chase away nightmares. Her voice filled the quiet room as her fingers worked against his tense muscles. Gradually, Jackson's grip on her wrist loosened. His breathing steadied as the spasm subsided, but he didn't release her completely. Instead, his thumb moved slightly against her pulse point, an almost unconscious caress that sent shivers up her spine. "Better?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. His eyes, when they met hers, held something new, a vulnerability, a crack in his armor she hadn't seen before. "Yes," he murmured. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, "Thank you, Leora." It was the first time he'd used her first name. The sound of it in his deep voice made her heart skip. The moment stretched between them with unspoken tension. His hand still encircled her wrist, his thumb still brushed against her racing pulse. Their faces were closer than they should be, his breath warm against her skin. The sharp knock on the door shattered the moment. They broke apart as Mrs. Caldwell entered with medication. "Time for your pain management, Mr. Elias," she announced, either oblivious to or deliberately ignoring the charged atmosphere. Leora stepped back, suddenly aware of how unprofessional she'd been. This man was her employer, her ticket out of debt, nothing more. So why did her skin still tingle where he'd touched her? Why did her heart race as if she'd run for miles? Later that night, as she helped him prepare for bed, the tension between them remained, a tangible thing neither acknowledged. When their fingers brushed during a transfer, neither pulled away immediately. When their eyes met, as she handed him medication, both held the glance a moment too long. "Good night, Miss Banks," he said finally, his voice rougher than usual. "Good night, Mr. Elias," she replied, backing toward the door. But as she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. "Leora." She looked back, finding his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that stole her breath. "Your mother was right," he said softly, "about music healing." The admission hung in the air between them, not just acknowledgement of her singing, but something deeper, a tiny piece of his wall crumbling. She smiled, feeling something warm unfurl in her chest. "See you tomorrow, Jackson." As she closed his door, Leora realized two things: she'd used his first name without thinking, and more dangerously, she was already looking forward to tomorrow, to seeing him again. This wasn't part of the plan. She was here for the money, for freedom from her father's debts, not to develop feelings for her guarded, compelling employer, not to find herself drawn to a man who seemed to understand the weight of invisible burdens, a man whose wealth couldn't shield him from the pain of abandonment any more than her poverty had protected her. Chapter 3. Touch of Fate. 2 weeks had passed since Leora began working at the mansion, 2 weeks of routines slowly memorized, of walls cautiously navigated. She had learned to anticipate Jackson's moods, which days the pain would be worse, which nights he might need extra medication. But tonight was different. Tonight would cross a boundary they had both silently acknowledged but never discussed. Tonight was the first time she would bathe him. Mrs. Caldwell had handled this task until now, but the older woman had left for her sister's wedding in Boston. For 3 days, Leora would be responsible for all aspects of Jackson's care. Her hands trembled slightly as she prepared the bathroom, testing the water temperature and arranging supplies. She had bathed her father during his worst binges, but this felt entirely different. Her father had been an obligation. Jackson was. She couldn't finish the thought. A soft knock at the bathroom door pulled her from her thoughts. Jackson had wheeled himself to the entrance, his expression carefully neutral. "Is everything ready?" he asked, his deep voice betraying nothing of what he must be feeling, embarrassment perhaps, or resignation. "Yes," Leora fought to keep her voice professional. "The water's the temperature Mrs. Caldwell specified." Tension hung between them, thick as the steam rising from the water. Leora had managed transfers and stretches, had helped him dress and take medication, but this level of intimacy was different. "We don't have to do this," Jackson said abruptly. "I can manage with a sponge bath." Pride. The realization hit her suddenly. This powerful man hated appearing vulnerable, especially before her. "It's my job," she said softly. "And I'm not uncomfortable if you're not." Their eyes locked, something unspoken passing between them. "All right," his voice was low. "Let's get this over with." The ritual began with practice transfers, wheelchair to bench, bench to the specially designed bath chair. But when it came time to remove his shirt, a charged silence descended. Leora's fingers trembled slightly on the first button. "I can do that," he said, his hands moving to take over. "I know you can." Her voice was gentle but firm. "But you don't have to." Something shifted in his gaze, surprise, perhaps, or respect. Slowly, he lowered his hands, surrendering to her care. Button by button, she exposed his chest, broad and muscled, testament to years of physical activity before his accident and the continued work to maintain his strength after. A scatter of scars marked his right side, silvery against his brown skin. "From the rescue," he said, following her gaze. "Rocks near the shoreline." Her fingers brushed one scar unconsciously, the raised tissue warm beneath her touch. Jackson's breath hitched, the small sound echoing in the quiet bathroom. She helped him remove his pants and underwear, her movements clinical despite the thunder of her heartbeat. His body was beautiful, powerful shoulders tapering to a narrow waist, strong arms, and legs that, while thinner from disuse, retained their shape. She forced herself to focus on the task rather than the man. The water welcomed him as she guided him into the bath. Steam rose around them, cocooning them in warm mist as she began washing his back, the cloth gliding over skin slick with water. "Is the temperature okay?" she asked, desperate to break the charged silence. "Yes," the words seemed torn from him. "You have gentle hands." The compliment caught her off guard. "Thank you." His eyes met hers over his shoulder, midnight dark and intense. "No one has touched me like this since the accident." "Like what?" The question escaped before she could stop it. "Like I'm still a man." The raw honesty in his voice made her heart clench. Not just a broken body to be managed. Something shifted between them in that moment, an honesty that transcended caregiver and patient, employer and employee. Her hand stilled on his shoulder, water dripping between her fingers. "You are still a man," she said softly. "One of the strongest I've ever met." He turned his head, their faces suddenly close in the steam-filled space. His eyes dropped to her lips for the briefest moment before returning to her eyes. "You don't know me," he murmured. "I'm learning." Her voice had dropped to a whisper. For one suspended moment, it seemed he might kiss her. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she found herself leaning slightly closer. Then he winced, a spasm catching him off guard. The moment shattered as Leora switched instantly to caregiver mode, supporting him through the flash of pain. "Sorry," he ground out between clenched teeth. "Don't apologize." Her hands worked the knotted muscle in his shoulder until he relaxed again. "Not for pain you can't control." As the spasm passed, the air between them remained charged, the almost moment lingering like the steam around them. Leora continued bathing him, each touch now weighted with awareness. Each brush of skin against skin, deliberate in a way it hadn't been before. When her fingers massaged shampoo into his hair, Jackson's eyes drifted closed, a small sound of pleasure escaping him. The intimacy of the moment, her hands in his hair, his vulnerability, sent warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the bathwater. "My mother used to do this," he said suddenly, eyes still closed, "when I was small and sick. Said there was healing in touch." The confession, so personal, so unexpected, touched something deep inside her. "There is," she agreed softly. "Science proves it. Human contact releases oxytocin, reduces stress hormones." His lips curved slightly. "Are you just my caregiver or a scientist, too?" "Community college nursing courses," she admitted, "before I had to drop out." His eyes opened, finding hers. "You should go back." The simple statement held no judgment, just quiet certainty. "Maybe someday," she replied, "when Dad's debts are paid." Something flashed across his face, an emotion she couldn't name before he nodded once. The rest of the bath passed in charged silence. Each touch, each shared glance carried weight beyond the simple act of caregiving. By the time she helped him from the water, wrapped in thick towels and back to his wheelchair, something fundamental had shifted between them. That night, as she retreated to her room, Leora pressed trembling fingers to her lips, remembering the moment they'd almost kissed. The way his eyes had darkened, the heat that had nothing to do with the bathwater. She was falling for him. The realization crashed through her with terrifying clarity, not for his money or his mansion, but for the man, wounded, complex, and beautiful, who hid behind walls of glass she was slowly learning to see through. In his own room, Jackson stared at the ceiling, his body still humming from her touch. For the first time since the accident, someone had made him feel whole again, made him feel like a man, not a patient, made him want things he'd thought forever beyond his reach. He closed his eyes, remembering the softness of her hands, the compassion in her gaze untainted by pity, the way her breath had caught when their faces drew close. Tomorrow, he decided, tomorrow he would tell her about the debt collectors who had come looking for her. Tomorrow he would offer to pay everything her father owed, to free her from the burden she carried. Tomorrow he would make sure she stayed, not just as his caretaker, but perhaps as something more. What neither realized as they drifted to sleep on opposite sides of the mansion was that fate had other plans, that their moment in the steam-filled bathroom had been just the beginning of a connection neither had been seeking, but both desperately needed, and that sometimes the most healing touch is the one that reaches not for broken bodies, but for wounded hearts. Chapter 4. Whispered Confessions. Moonlight painted silver stripes across Jackson's bedroom floor as Leora entered with his evening medications. The mansion was unnaturally quiet with Mrs. Caldwell still away, the vastness of the empty space making every small sound echo. 3 days had passed since the bath, 3 days of charged glances, lingering touches, and words that seemed to hold double meanings. They had established a careful dance around the electricity between them, neither willing to acknowledge what had almost happened in the steam-filled bathroom. Jackson sat in his wheelchair by the window, silhouetted against the night sky. The moon reflected off the lake beyond, casting him an ethereal light that softened his hard edges. "Your medication," Leora said, her voice hushed as if afraid to disturb the strange peace between them. He turned, his eyes finding hers in the dimness. "Thank you." As he reached for the pills, his fingers brushed hers, a touch that could have been accidental, but felt deliberate. Neither pulled away immediately. "There was a man looking for you today," he said, his voice carefully neutral as he swallowed the medication. "Said his name was Darius." Leora's blood froze. "He came here. He called, somehow found out where you work." Jackson's eyes never left her face. "He seemed quite insistent about money your father owed him." Shame and fear tangled in her chest. "I'm sorry, I never gave him this address." "I know," he interrupted gently. "People like that have ways of finding information." She turned away, unable to bear his gaze. "I'll handle it. It won't affect my work." "Leora." His voice stopped her retreat. "How much?" The question hung between them. She couldn't answer, couldn't bring herself to name the staggering sum that kept her awake at night. "It doesn't matter," she finally said. "It does to me." He wheeled closer, stopping directly before her. "How much?" She met his eyes, saw nothing but genuine concern where she'd expected judgment. 15,000 to Darius, almost 30,000 more to others. Jackson didn't flinch at the numbers. "I can pay it." "No," the word escaped sharply. "That's not why I'm here. I don't want your money. Not even when it could solve your problems. Those debts are all I have left of my father," she said, the truth spilling out in the intimate darkness. "Paying them myself is the only way I'll ever be free of him." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You're not just working to pay them off. You're working to prove something." "That I'm not him," she whispered. "That I finish what I start, that I pay what I owe." Jackson's hand found hers, surprisingly warm against her suddenly cold fingers. "Come sit with me." He led her to the small seating area by the fireplace, the glow of embers casting shadows across his features as she settled across from him. "I want to tell you something," he said, his voice low, "about the accident." Leora remained silent, sensing his need to speak. "It wasn't just some random act of heroism," he began. "The boy who fell from the boat was my business partner's son. We were celebrating a major acquisition, all of us on my yacht. I'd had too much to drink, was showing off." His jaw tightened. "The weather turned suddenly. I ignored the warnings, insisted we stay out longer." Pain shadowed his eyes as he continued. "When the wave hit and Ethan went overboard, I didn't think. I just jumped. I managed to reach him, keep him afloat until they could pull us both back. He looked down at their joined hands. Everyone called me a hero, but all I could think was that my arrogance nearly killed a 5-year-old boy. His voice roughened. Then came the spinal injury diagnosis, partial paralysis, years of therapy with minimal improvement. But you saved him, Leora said softly. At a cost. His thumb traced gentle circles on her palm. My fiancé left 6 months later. Couldn't handle the new me, she said. My business partners bought me out, claiming they were doing me a favor. My family visited less and less until holidays became phone calls, then just cards. Anger flared in Leora's chest. They abandoned you when you needed them most. They weren't the only ones. Bitterness edged his words. Friends disappeared. Colleagues sent flowers instead of visiting. The world has little patience for broken men. You're not broken, she said fiercely, leaning forward. Having limitations doesn't make you less. Something warmed in his gaze. Is that what you see when you look at me, Leora? A man with limitations, not defined by them. I see you, she answered simply. Strong, stubborn, sometimes infuriating, her lips curved slightly, and yes, dealing with limitations, but never broken. The air between them thickened with unspoken emotions. I see you, too, he murmured. Carrying burdens no one your age should have to carry, fighting battles that aren't yours. They became mine when he died. She hadn't meant to continue sharing, but something about the moonlight and his honesty pulled the words from her. My father wasn't always a drunk. After Mom died, he just collapsed. Started borrowing money, promising to pay it back after one big score that never came. Her voice wavered. I tried to stop him, tried to make him see what he was doing, but he'd just look at me with Mom's eyes staring back at him from my face and drink until he couldn't see me anymore. A single tear escaped, tracking down her cheek. Jackson reached up, his thumb gently brushing it away. The tender gesture broke something inside her. I found him, she whispered. When he died, he'd been sick for days, refusing to see a doctor. I came home from my shift, and he was just gone. The bottles were empty, and so was his bank account. All he left me was debt and shame. Jackson's hand cupped her face, gentle as whispered prayers. There is no shame in surviving, Leora, in rising from the ashes someone else created. Her eyes met his, seeing in them not pity, but understanding, the recognition of one wounded soul for another. We are quite a pair, aren't we? She said softly. Both fighting ghosts. Perhaps that's why fate brought you here, he replied, his voice deepening. Maybe broken recognizes broken. You're still not broken, she insisted, leaning into his touch. His smile was sad and beautiful. Then neither are you. The moment stretched between them, fragile as spun glass, and just as brilliant. His thumb traced the curve of her cheekbone, his eyes dropping to her lips. This time there was no muscle spasm to interrupt, no sudden knock at the door. There was only moonlight, confession, and the magnetic pull between two souls who had recognized in each other what they couldn't see in themselves, wholeness despite their wounds. Jackson leaned forward, hesitating just a breath away from her lips. Tell me to stop, he whispered. Instead, Leora closed the distance between them. Their first kiss was gentle, questioning, a whispered conversation between bodies that had known pain and were afraid of causing more. His lips were warm against hers, his hands steady on her face. When they parted, his eyes searched hers. Whatever he saw there made him pull her closer, his second kiss deeper, more insistent. Her hands found his shoulders, solid and warm beneath thin cotton. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her from her chair onto his lap. This is a terrible idea, she breathed against his mouth. The worst, he agreed, trailing kisses along her jaw. Tell me to stop. I can't, she admitted, her fingers threading through his hair. They stayed that way for what felt like hours, exchanging kisses that gradually transformed from tentative to hungry, hands exploring with increasing boldness. When his lips found the sensitive spot below her ear, Leora gasped, arching against him. "Stay with me tonight," he murmured against her skin, "not as my caretaker." The invitation hung between them, weighted with possibilities and complications. "Jackson," she began, trying to summon rational thought through the haze of desire. "This could ruin everything." "Or begin everything," he countered, his forehead resting against hers. "I haven't felt alive since the accident. Until you." His honesty disarmed her final defenses. Wordlessly, she slid from his lap, taking his hands in hers. Together they moved toward the bed that had until now been strictly professional territory. As moonlight bathed them in silver, confessions gave way to discovery. Professional boundaries dissolved beneath tender touches and whispered affirmations. Her innocence met his experience with cautious wonder. His vulnerability found safe harbor in her acceptance. In the quiet aftermath, tangled in sheets and each other, Leora's head rested on Jackson's chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. His fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I should be terrified right now," she confessed into the darkness, "about what this means for my job, for your care." His arms tightened around her. "Are you?" "Strangely, no." She tilted her face up to his. "For the first time since Dad died, I feel anchored." The smile that spread across his face transformed him, erasing years of pain and isolation. "Then stay anchored with me, Leora Banks," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "We'll figure out the rest together." As sleep claimed them, neither spoke of love. It was too soon, too fragile to name, but it grew nonetheless in the space their confessions had created, nurtured by moonlight and the realization that sometimes the most broken pieces fit together perfectly, creating something stronger than either could be alone. What began as whispered confessions had transformed into silent promises, written not in words, but in the language of bodies finding home in each other's arms. Chapter 5. Forbidden Desires. Morning light filtered through the curtains, casting golden patterns across the tangled sheets. Leora stirred, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar weight of an arm draped across her waist. Then memories of the night before flooded back, whispered confessions, passionate kisses, boundaries crossed. Jackson slept peacefully beside her, his face relaxed in a way she'd never seen during waking hours. Sleep softened the sharp lines of his jaw, erased the perpetual furrow between his brows. He looked younger, unburdened. She should leave, return to her room before Mrs. Caldwell returned and discovered them. This, whatever this was between them, complicated everything. She was his caretaker, dependent on this job to escape her father's debts. He was her employer, a man still healing from both physical and emotional wounds. Yet, as she tried to slip from beneath his arm, his grip tightened. "Stay," he murmured, eyes still closed. "Mrs. Caldwell will be back soon," she whispered. "I don't care." His eyes opened, midnight dark and intense even in the morning light. "Do you?" The question hung between them, far more complex than it seemed. Did she care about her job, about appearances, about protecting her heart from inevitable pain? "I should," she admitted. "But I don't." His smile transformed his face, making her breath catch. He pulled her closer, his kiss unhurried yet demanding, sending heat spiraling through her body despite her better judgment. "I've never woken up with someone before," she confessed against his lips. His movement stilled. "Never?" She shook her head, suddenly shy. "Last night was my first." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You should have told me." "Would it have changed anything?" "I would have been gentler," he said, brushing a curl from her face with surprising tenderness. "You were perfect," she assured him, her cheeks warming. "I wouldn't change a thing." His expression softened, something vulnerable flickering in his gaze. "Neither would I." Then, more quietly, "Though I wish I could have given you more." She knew he meant his body, the limitations of his condition that he still saw as failings. Leora pressed a kiss to his chest, directly over his heart. "You gave me exactly what I needed," she whispered. The days that followed existed in a space between reality and fantasy. By day, they maintained professional appearances. Leora performed her caretaker duties while Mrs. Caldwell watched with suspicious eyes. But nights belonged to them alone, filled with passionate exploration and tender discoveries. In the darkness of his room, Jackson taught her things about her own body she'd never imagined. His hands and mouth mapped her skin like treasured territory, his experience guiding her innocent responses into something bold and uninhibited. In return, she showed him that his paralysis didn't define his manhood, that pleasure existed in unexpected places, that connection transcended physical limitations. "You make me forget," he murmured one night, his head resting on her bare stomach as her fingers traced patterns in his hair. "When I'm with you, I forget to be angry at my body." "Good," she replied, tugging gently until he moved up to kiss her, "because your body is beautiful to me." His eyes darkened with emotion. "How did I find you?" "You didn't," she reminded him with a smile. "Serena's job listing did. Then I owe Serena a very large gift." His hand traced the curve of her hip. "Though I suspect she didn't envision this particular job benefit." Leora laughed, the sound swallowed by his kiss as desire rekindled between them. During the day, little things betrayed their secret, a lingering touch during therapy exercises, a private smile shared across the dinner table, the way Jackson's eyes followed her movements with possessive heat. Mrs. Caldwell noticed, her disapproving frowns becoming more frequent, though she said nothing directly. One afternoon, as Leora prepared Jackson's medication in the kitchen, Mrs. Caldwell entered, her movements betraying unusual hesitation. "He's laughing again," the older woman said quietly. Leora looked up, surprised by the observation. "I'm sorry, Mr. Elias. He laughs now." Mrs. Caldwell's eyes held something complex, concern mixed with reluctant admiration. "I haven't heard him laugh since before the accident." "That's good, isn't it?" Leora asked cautiously. Mrs. Caldwell sighed, setting down the folder she'd been carrying. "I've been with the Elias family for 27 years. I watched Jackson grow up, saw what his father's expectations did to him." Her voice softened. "Then the accident happened, and it was like watching him disappear into himself." The unexpected glimpse into her thoughts caught Leora off guard. "You care about him?" "Of course I do," Mrs. Caldwell said sharply, then her tone gentled. "Which is why I must warn you, this isn't the first time a caretaker has developed feelings for him." Leora's hand stilled. "I'm not, the last one," Mrs. Caldwell continued, cutting her off, manipulated his vulnerability, used his loneliness. When she realized he wouldn't give her what she wanted, financial security without strings, she left him more broken than before. Understanding dawned. "You're not disapproving of me. You're protecting him." "I'm trying to." The older woman's gaze was direct. "He's different with you, more himself than he's been in years, but I've watched his heart be broken before, and I'm not eager to see it happen again." "I'm not her," Leora said firmly. "And I'm not with him for his money." "Perhaps not intentionally," Mrs. Caldwell acknowledged. "But when he offers to solve all your problems, and he will, what happens then? Will you still believe it's love? Or will you see it for what it could become, a transaction disguised as affection?" The accusation stung precisely because it touched Leora's deepest fear, that what burned between them was temporary, that Jackson might see her as a diversion, or worse, a charity case. "You're wrong about him," she said finally, "and you're wrong about me." Mrs. Caldwell's expression softened marginally. "I hope so, child, for both your sakes." The conversation haunted Leora as she helped Jackson with his evening routine. Her movements were mechanical, her mind elsewhere, as she administered his medication. "What's wrong?" he asked, capturing her hand before she could withdraw. "You've barely spoken all evening." She hesitated, uncertain how to voice her fears without sounding accusatory. "Mrs. Caldwell thinks I'm using you," she finally admitted, or that you're using me, or both. Understanding dawned in his eyes. Ah, the cautionary talk. She gave me one, too. Surprise flickered through Leora. What did she say? That I'm confusing gratitude with attraction, that I'll hurt you when I inevitably get tired of playing savior. His jaw tightened. She means well. Does she? Leora pulled her hand away. Or is she right? Jackson's expression darkened. You think I'm playing with you? I think you've been isolated for 2 years. I think I'm the first woman who's touched you without clinical detachment in a long time. She forced herself to meet his gaze. How do you know this is real? Because I've been with women who wanted my money, my status, my connections. His voice was low, intense. And none of them made me feel the way you do when you simply look at me. The raw honesty in his words disarmed her defenses. What are we doing, Jackson? She whispered. Living, he answered simply. For the first time in years, I'm actually living instead of just surviving. He pulled her onto his lap, his arms encircling her waist. I don't want to be your employer anymore, Leora. I don't want you as my caretaker. I want you as my partner, my equal. His eyes held hers, unflinching. Stay with me, not for the job, not for the money, for us. People will talk, she countered weakly. They'll say exactly what Mrs. Caldwell thinks, that I seduced you for your money. Let them talk, his hands framed her face. I've spent 2 years letting other people define me by what I've lost. I won't let them define what we've found. Something broke open inside her chest, a dam of fear and doubt crumbling beneath the force of his certainty. I'm scared, she admitted. I've never felt this way before. Neither have I, he confessed, surprising her. Not even before the accident. His admission hung in the air between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to fully voice. Stay with me tonight, he murmured against her lips. Tomorrow we'll figure out the rest. As his mouth claimed hers, Leora surrendered to the current pulling them together, dangerous, inevitable, and more powerful than either of their pasts. Later, tangled in sheets and each other, she watched moonlight play across the planes of his face. He slept peacefully, one arm possessively draped across her waist. In that moment of quiet, Leora finally admitted to herself what she'd been fighting for weeks: she was falling in love with Jackson Elias. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, it settled in her chest like a missing puzzle piece, finally finding its home. Whatever complications tomorrow brought, Mrs. Caldwell's disapproval, the world's judgment, their own lingering insecurities, tonight she would hold this truth close. For two broken people who had never expected to be whole again, they had somehow found in each other not just passion but possibility, not just desire but hope. And for tonight, that was enough. Chapter 6. Storms Within. Leora, we have a situation. Mrs. Caldwell's voice, tight with tension, greeted Leora as she returned from grocery shopping. The older woman stood in the foyer, her usually perfect posture even more rigid than normal. What's wrong? Is Jackson okay? Alarm shot through Leora, groceries forgotten. Mr. Elias is fine. Mrs. Caldwell's emphasis on the formal title wasn't subtle. His family has arrived unexpectedly. They're with him in the library now. A chill ran down Leora's spine. In 2 months at the mansion, Jackson's family had never once visited. He rarely spoke of them except to mention their gradual disappearance from his life after the accident. Should I? Leora gestured vaguely toward the kitchen, suddenly unsure of her place. Mr. Elias asked for you to join them when you returned. Mrs. Caldwell's disapproval radiated from every syllable. You might want to change first. Leora glanced down at her simple jeans and t-shirt, suddenly self-conscious. Of course. 15 minutes later, dressed in a modest blue dress she'd found in her closet, one of many Jackson had quietly ordered for her since their relationship changed, Leora approached the library. Voices drifted through the partially open door, sharp with argument. Ridiculous policy keeping us waiting like servants, a woman's voice complained. We're your family, Jackson. Family who couldn't be bothered to visit for 2 years, came Jackson's cold reply. Forgive me if I don't roll out the red carpet. We've been busy, a male voice countered. And you made it clear you didn't want our help. I didn't want your pity, Jackson corrected. There's a difference. Leora hesitated, reluctant to interrupt the tense exchange. Before she could decide whether to enter, Jackson's voice called out, I know you're there, Leora. Please come in. Taking a deep breath, she pushed open the door. The library was one of the mansion's most impressive rooms, walls of leather-bound books, a massive fireplace, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the lake. Jackson sat in his wheelchair near the fireplace, facing 3 people whose resemblance to him was unmistakable. An older man with Jackson's sharp jawline and broad shoulder stood by the window, disapproval etched into every line of his face. Beside him, a woman in her 50s, elegant, cold, with Jackson's penetrating eyes, perched on an antique chair. A younger man, perhaps a few years older than Jackson, lounged on the sofa with the practiced ease of someone born to privilege. All 3 turned to stare as Leora entered. Ah, the caretaker, the older woman said, her gaze sweeping dismissively over Leora. Mrs. Caldwell mentioned you. Mother, father, Nolan, this is Leora Banks, Jackson said, his voice carefully neutral though his eyes held a warning when they met Leora's. Leora, my parents, Malcolm and Eleanor Elias, and my brother. Pleasure, Nolan drawled without standing. Leora nodded politely. Nice to meet you all. Eleanor's perfectly sculpted eyebrow arched. Such a young caretaker. Where did you train, dear? The question was a trap, and they both knew it. Mrs. Caldwell has been an excellent mentor, Leora replied diplomatically. So, no formal training, then, Eleanor concluded with a thin smile. How progressive of you, Jackson. Anger flashed across Jackson's face, quickly controlled. Leora has been more effective than the parade of professionals you insisted on hiring. I'm sure she has, Nolan muttered, just loud enough to be heard. Leora felt her cheeks warm but kept her expression neutral. Jackson had warned her this might happen someday, his family's return, their inevitable judgment. Still, the reality stung. We should discuss why you're here, Jackson said flatly, preferably without insulting my staff. Malcolm finally spoke, his deep voice so similar to Jackson's it was unsettling. The Carter merger is approaching final stages. The board wants your shares voting in favor. My shares, my vote, Jackson replied, and my answer is still no. Be reasonable, Eleanor snapped. You've been removed from operations for 2 years. You can't possibly understand the strategic implications. What I understand is that Victor Carter wants my family's company because he couldn't build his own, Jackson countered. What I understand is that his plan involves liquidating divisions I built from nothing. Divisions that are underperforming, Malcolm argued. Because you've been systematically strangling their resources since I left. Jackson's voice rose, his control slipping. Did you think I wouldn't notice? That I'd stop paying attention just because I couldn't physically be there? The tension in the room thickened. Leora shifted uncomfortably, feeling like an intruder in a private war. Perhaps I should give you privacy, she suggested quietly. No, Jackson's hand found hers, his grip firm. Stay. The gesture wasn't lost on his family. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. Nolan straightened from his lounging position, and Malcolm's expression darkened. I see, Eleanor said coldly. Now we understand why you've been ignoring our calls. Mother, Jackson began, warning in his tone. How much is he paying you, Miss Banks? Eleanor asked directly. To provide extra services. Fury exploded in Leora's chest. Excuse me. Mother. Jackson's voice cracked like a whip. Apologize immediately. Don't be naive, Jackson, Malcolm cut in. This wouldn't be the first time someone saw you as a ticket to financial security. Like Clara. Jackson's laugh was bitter. Your hand-picked fiancé who couldn't handle damaged goods. Clara was confused and frightened, Eleanor defended. This one is simply opportunistic. This one, Leora said quietly but firmly, finding her voice, is standing right here, and this one doesn't need your son's money. All eyes turned to her, surprise evident on the elder Elias' faces. I came here to do a job, she continued, her voice steady despite her racing heart. I stayed because your son is the most remarkable man I've ever met, not because of his wealth or his name, but because of who he is, his strength, his intelligence, his heart. Silence fell over the room. Jackson's hand tightened around hers, supporting her as she defended them both. How touching, Nolan finally drawled. Almost believable if not for the convenient timing, right when the merger would triple the value of Jackson's shares. Enough. Jackson's voice was dangerously quiet. You've made your opinion clear. Now let me make mine equally clear. My relationship with Leora is not up for discussion or approval. My shares will vote against the merger, and if you continue to insult the woman I love, you can leave my home immediately. The word love hung in the air, the first time either of them had spoken it aloud. Leora's breath caught as Jackson's eyes met hers, unwavering in their certainty. Eleanor rose, her composure cracking slightly. You can't possibly be serious. She's your employee, for God's sake, a girl from nowhere with nothing. She's everything I never knew I needed, Jackson countered. And she has what none of you offered after the accident, faith in me, not pity, not obligation. Faith. Malcolm stepped forward, his expression grave. Son, think carefully about what you're doing. There are ruminations about your mental state since the accident. Decisions like these only feed those concerns. The threat was veiled but clear, questions of competency, of Jackson's ability to manage his affairs and assets. Are you threatening me, father? Jackson asked quietly. I'm warning you, Malcolm corrected, as your father and as chairman of the board. Tension crackled between father and son, decades of complicated history evident in their locked gazes. I think you should leave, Jackson finally said. All of you. Eleanor gathered her purse with trembling hands. This isn't over, Jackson. Are you? He asked, genuine pain beneath his anger. Because family doesn't disappear when things get difficult. Family doesn't return only when they need something. Nolan rose, his casual demeanor replaced with unexpected sincerity. We made mistakes, Jackson. But this isn't the way to punish us for them. This isn't about punishment, Jackson replied, softer. This is about living my life on my terms, something I should have done long before the accident. Eleanor clutched her purse like a shield. Your father had a heart attack last year, she said abruptly. Did you know that? The revelation hit Jackson visibly, a flicker of shock crossing his face before hardening into something more complex. No, I didn't. He didn't want you told, she continued. Said you had enough to worry about with your condition. Or perhaps, Jackson suggested quietly, he didn't want me to know because then he'd have to explain why neither of you bothered to visit your supposedly dying son for 2 years. Malcolm stepped forward, anger and something like regret battling in his expression. We respected your privacy, your independence. You respected nothing but your own comfort, Jackson countered. It was easier to stay away than to face what happened, easier to pressure me into selling my shares than to include me while I was inconveniently disabled. A heavy silence fell as truth hung exposed between them. We'll be in touch about the merger, Malcolm finally said, his voice carefully controlled. The Elias family departed in brittle silence, Mrs. Caldwell escorting them to the door. When they were gone, Leora knelt beside Jackson's wheelchair, her hands covering his. I'm sorry, she whispered. I never meant to come between you and your family. You didn't, he assured her, cupping her face. They did that themselves long ago. His eyes searched hers, vulnerability replacing the armor he'd worn during the confrontation. Did you mean what you said, about staying because of who I am, not what I have? Every word, she promised. You could lose everything tomorrow, and I'd still be here. Something broke in his expression, the last wall around his heart crumbling. I love you, Leora Banks. I should have told you before now, but I was afraid you'd think it was too soon, or that I couldn't possibly know my own heart. I love you, too, she whispered, the words freeing something long caged within her. I've been afraid to say it, too. His kiss was different than those they'd shared before, deeper, uninhibited, as if the final barrier between them had dissolved. When he pulled back, his eyes burned with determination. They're going to come back, he warned, with lawyers, with concerns about my competency, with offers to buy you off. Let them try, she said fiercely. I'm not going anywhere. That night, their lovemaking held a new intensity, something raw and desperate, as if they both needed to physically affirm what they'd declared emotionally. Each touch was a promise, each kiss a vow that whatever storms came, they would weather them together. Afterward, as Leora lay with her head on Jackson's chest, she whispered into the darkness, no matter what happens, no matter what they say or do, remember this moment. Remember us exactly as we are right now. His arms tightened around her. This is just the beginning, Leora, not the end. Outside, lightning flashed across the lake, illuminating the bedroom in brief, brilliant light. Thunder followed, vibrating through the mansion's walls, the perfect mirror to the storm they'd weathered today and those they would face tomorrow. But for now, in each other's arms, they found perfect shelter. Chapter 7. Hope's Promise. The blue glow of the laptop illuminated Leora's face as she scrolled through yet another medical journal. 3 weeks had passed since the confrontation with Jackson's family. Though they hadn't returned in person, their lawyers had called twice, and the tension lingered like a storm cloud on the horizon. But Leora had been fighting a different battle, in secret, one waged through late-night research and hushed phone calls while Jackson slept. You're still up. His voice startled her. She hadn't heard his wheelchair approaching. Quickly, she closed the laptop. Just couldn't sleep. Jackson's eyes narrowed slightly as he moved closer. That's the third night this week you've been, just couldn't sleeping with that laptop. I'm researching something, she admitted. Something you don't want me to know about. His tone remained light, but she detected the hint of hurt beneath. Leora sighed, opening the laptop again. I wanted to be sure before I said anything. The screen displayed a medical article titled, Breakthrough in Partial Spinal Cord Regeneration Therapy. Jackson's expression shifted as he scanned the text, his jaw tightening. You've been researching treatments? Yes. She took his hand, squeezing gently. There's a specialist in Boston, Dr. Nia Sharma. She's pioneering a new approach combining stem cell therapy with targeted neural stimulation. I've seen a dozen specialists, Leora, his voice hardened. Had 100 treatments. False hope is more painful than acceptance. This is different, she insisted. Her success rates with injuries like yours, stop. The word cut through the air between them. Just stop. Hurt flashed across Leora's face. I thought you'd want to walk again. Of course I want that. Frustration edged his words. But I've been down this road before, the excitement, the procedures, the crushing disappointment when nothing changes. But what if something does change this time, she pressed. And what if it doesn't? His eyes met hers, filled with a pain she hadn't seen in months. Do you have any idea what it's like to hope, to truly believe, only to have that hope shattered again and again and again until you can't bear to hope anymore? The raw vulnerability in his voice made her chest ache. She knelt beside his wheelchair, her hands covering his. I do know, she said softly. Every time my father promised to stop drinking, every time he swore this loan was the last one, every time he said he'd get better. Understanding dawned in Jackson's expression. And you kept hoping anyway. Until the day I found him, she admitted. Then I stopped. But Jackson, this isn't like that. This is science, not promises from an addict. He looked away, conflict evident in the tense line of his shoulders. I've made peace with who I am now, with this body, these limitations. Have you? Really? She challenged gently. I have to, he whispered. The alternative is to live in constant disappointment. Leora cupped his face, turning it back toward her. What if the alternative is possibility? What if it's a chance at something more? For a long moment, he simply looked at her, searching her eyes as if seeking something only she could provide. I called Dr. Sharma, she continued softly. Sent your records. She thinks you're an ideal candidate for her program. You had no right, he said, but there was more hurt than anger in his tone. I know. I'm sorry. She didn't back down. But I couldn't stand watching you accept limitations that might not be necessary anymore, not without at least exploring every option. And if it fails, he asked, his voice barely audible, if I let myself hope again, and nothing changes, what then? Then we face it together, she promised, just like we face everything else. He closed his eyes, something shifting in his expression, a battle between fear and possibility waging within him. She's coming to Chicago next month for a conference, Leora said. She's willing to see you for a consultation. No commitments, just an evaluation. When Jackson opened his eyes again, there was a vulnerability there that made him look younger, more exposed than she'd ever seen him. I'm terrified, he admitted, not just of failure, of hope itself. I know. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his. But you're the bravest person I've ever known, Jackson Elias, the man who jumped into a storm to save a child. He isn't afraid of a little hope. His laugh was soft, broken. That man feels like someone else entirely. He's still in there, she whispered. I see him every day. Jackson's hands came up to frame her face, his touch infinitely gentle. You see me more clearly than anyone ever has. Then trust my vision, she urged. Trust me. After what felt like an eternity, he nodded once. One consultation, no promises. Relief flooded through her. That's all I'm asking. The Boston Medical Center loomed before them, glass and steel gleaming in the autumn sunlight. What had begun as a consultation in Chicago had evolved into a formal evaluation in Dr. Sharma's specialized facility. Leora felt Jackson's tension as she wheeled him through the entrance, his body rigid, his breathing controlled. We can still leave, she offered quietly, giving him an out even as she prayed he wouldn't take it. His hand covered hers on the wheelchair handle. No, we've come this far. Dr. Nia Sharma was younger than they expected, perhaps 40, with intelligent eyes behind stylish glasses and an air of quiet confidence that immediately put them at ease. Mr. Elias, she greeted, extending her hand. I've been reviewing your case extensively. Thank you for agreeing to come in person. Jackson's grip was firm as he shook her hand. Thank my persistent girlfriend. She's the reason I'm here. The word girlfriend still sent a thrill through Leora, even after months together. So much had changed since that first night in his room, their relationship deepening into something neither had expected to find. Then I'm grateful for her persistence, Dr. Sharma smiled, because I believe you're an excellent candidate for our program. For the next hour, she explained the treatment protocol in detail, a combination of targeted stem cell injections, innovative neural stimulation, and intensive physical therapy. Her hands moved expressively as she described the science, her passion evident in every word. I want to be very clear, she emphasized. This isn't a miracle cure. The treatment is grueling, the recovery painful, and the results vary from patient to patient. What's the success rate? Jackson asked, his businessman's mind focusing on statistics. For patients with your specific injury pattern, about 60% experience significant improvement in lower limb function, 30% regain the ability to walk with assistance, 10% achieve independent mobility. And the rest, he pressed. Experience minimal improvement or none at all, she admitted honestly. I won't sugarcoat this, Mr. Elias. It's a difficult road with no guarantees. Leora watched Jackson absorb this information, saw the calculations running behind his eyes, weighing hope against potential disappointment, possibility against pain. When would we start? He finally asked. Dr. Sharma's smile was warm. We have an opening in the program next month. The initial phase requires 8 weeks in Boston, followed by ongoing therapy that can be managed remotely with periodic check-ins. 2 months away from home, Jackson mused, his eyes finding Leora's. I'll be with you, she said immediately, every step of the way. His expression softened at her choice of words. Every step, every single one, she promised. You don't have to do this, Jackson said later that night in their hotel room. Stay in Boston for months, put your life on hold. Leora looked up from packing their overnight bag. My life isn't on hold. It's with you. What about your father's debts? I've been making payments, she reminded him. And I have enough saved now to, let me pay them, he interrupted, the words rushing as if he'd been holding them back for months. All of them. Leora froze. Jackson, we've talked about this. I know you want to handle them yourself. I respect that. He moved his wheelchair closer. But if we're doing this treatment, I need to know you're not stressed about money, that you're not working as my caretaker while also supporting me through this process. I'm not your caretaker anymore, she said softly. I'm your partner. Exactly. His eyes held hers. And partners support each other. Let me do this for you, Leora, not because I'm trying to buy your affection or because I think you can't handle it yourself, but because I love you and I can remove this burden from your shoulders. She sat on the edge of the bed, emotions warring within her. For so long, her father's debts had defined her, shackles she was determined to break through her own efforts. Yet here was Jackson offering freedom, not as charity, but as partnership. I don't want to feel like I owe you, she admitted, voicing her deepest fear. You could never owe me, he said fiercely. What you've given me is beyond price. What have I given you? She asked, genuinely curious. His smile was tender as he reached for her hand. Hope, purpose, love when I believed I was unlovable, a reason to fight when I'd surrendered to my limitations. Tears pricked at her eyes. That goes both ways, you know. Then let me do this, he urged, as an act of love, not obligation. Looking into his eyes, eyes that had once been cold and distant, but now held nothing but warmth when they gazed at her, Leora finally nodded. Okay, she whispered. But on one condition. Name it. When you walk again, she emphasized the when, not if, we dance, a real dance, you and me. Joy blossomed across his face, transforming him. That's a promise I intend to keep, Leora Banks. He pulled her from the bed onto his lap, his arms encircling her waist as his mouth found hers. The kiss deepened quickly, months of intimacy allowing them to read each other's desires without words. His hands slid beneath her shirt, warm against her skin as she shifted to straddle him. Are you sure about this? She whispered against his lips, meaning both the treatment and what was about to happen between them. More sure than I've ever been about anything, he answered, lifting her to carry her to the bed. That night, their lovemaking held a new edge, part desperation, part celebration. The future stretched before them, uncertain yet filled with possibility. When they finally lay spent in each other's arms, Leora traced the scars on his chest, symbols of both his sacrifice and his survival. No matter what happens with the treatment, she murmured sleepily, you're already the strongest man I know. His arms tightened around her. And you're the reason I'm willing to hope again. As they drifted to sleep, the promise of tomorrow hung between them, not just the treatment or the possibility of walking, but the life they were building together, a life where hope wasn't a burden, but a gift they gave each other daily. A life where love had healed wounds far deeper than any physical injury could reach. Chapter 8. Breaking Chains. Again, Dr. Sharma instructed, her voice firm but kind. Sweat beaded on Jackson's forehead as he gripped the parallel bars, his arms trembling with effort. 6 weeks into treatment, and each day brought the same brutal routine, hours of neural stimulation followed by physical therapy that pushed him to his absolute limits. "I can't," he ground out, muscles screaming in protest. "You can," Leora countered from beside him, close enough to catch him if he fell, but far enough to let him struggle. 3 more steps, Jackson. The determination in her eyes gave him strength he didn't know he possessed. With a groan that came from somewhere deep inside, he forced his right leg forward, a jerky, uncoordinated movement, but a movement nonetheless. "That's it," Dr. Sharma encouraged. "Now the left." Pain lanced through his spine as nerve endings awakened after years of dormancy. The stem cell injections and electrical stimulation had created new pathways, but training his body to use them was excruciating work. "One more," Leora whispered, her voice a lifeline in the sea of pain. With a final surge of will, Jackson dragged his left foot forward, completing the 3 steps before collapsing into his wheelchair. Exhaustion claimed him immediately, his breathing ragged. "Excellent progress," Dr. Sharma noted, making marks on her tablet. "The neural response is strengthening every day." But Jackson barely heard her, his eyes finding Leora's. In their depths, he saw not just pride but absolute certainty, faith in him that never wavered, even on the darkest days when progress seemed impossible. "We're done for today," Dr. Sharma said, sensing his fatigue. "Rest well, Mr. Elias. Tomorrow we increase the difficulty." When they were alone in the therapy room, Leora knelt before his wheelchair, her hands covering his trembling ones. "You're incredible," she said softly. "I'm a wreck," he countered with a weak smile. "The most magnificent wreck I've ever seen." She leaned forward, pressing a gentle kiss to his lips. 3 steps today, tomorrow maybe 4. Jackson's throat tightened with emotion he couldn't express, gratitude for her unflagging support, love that deepened with each passing day, and something else he'd nearly forgotten how to feel, pride in himself. "Take me back to the room," he said, voice rough with exhaustion. "I need a shower and about 12 hours of sleep." Their temporary apartment was just 2 floors up from the medical facility, a luxurious concession to Jackson's wealth that made the grueling treatment slightly more bearable. As Leora helped him into the elevator, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. "It's Darius again," she sighed, showing him the screen. "Answer it," Jackson encouraged. "Let's end this once and for all." She hesitated before accepting the call on speaker. "Hello, Darius." "Miss Banks," the debt collector's voice was smooth as oil. "I've been trying to reach you for days." "I'm aware." Her tone remained neutral. "I've been busy. Too busy to honor your father's debts." A hint of menace crept into his words. "That's not how this works, little girl." Jackson's jaw tightened at the man's tone, but he remained silent, letting Leora handle it as they'd agreed. "The funds were transferred to your account 3 days ago," she said calmly. 15,000 plus the 2,000 in interest you claimed. The transaction confirmation was emailed to you." Silence stretched for a moment. "I'll need to verify that." "Verify all you want. The debt is paid. We're done. Your father had other arrangements with me." "My father is dead," Leora interrupted, steel entering her voice. "And any arrangements died with him. The documented loan has been repaid in full. If you contact me again, it will be through my lawyer." She ended the call before Darius could respond, her hands trembling slightly as she slipped the phone into her pocket. "You okay?" Jackson asked softly as the elevator doors opened. "Better than okay," she replied, a weight visibly lifting from her shoulders. "That's the last one. They're all paid now." Pride swelled in Jackson's chest. Though he'd provided the money, Leora had insisted on handling each creditor herself, facing down the people who had terrorized her for months with a strength that never ceased to amaze him. "Free at last," he murmured. Both of us, she agreed, wheeling him toward their apartment, breaking different kinds of chains. Later, as steam filled the bathroom, Leora helped him from the wheelchair into the specially designed shower chair. These moments of vulnerability had long since lost their awkwardness, transformed into rituals of intimacy and trust. "Join me?" he asked, catching her hand before she could step away. Her smile was answer enough as she stripped off her clothes and stepped under the spray with him. Water cascaded over her dark skin, following the curves he had memorized with hands and lips over countless nights. "Turn around," she instructed gently. "Let me wash your back." Her hands worked the tense muscles of his shoulders and neck, soapy fingers easing knots formed during therapy. Jackson closed his eyes, surrendering to her touch in a way he'd never surrendered to anyone before her. "Dr. Sharma says the neural pathways are strengthening faster than she expected," Leora said, her voice soft against the hiss of the shower. "The new medication seems to be helping." "I felt something different today," Jackson admitted. "When I was standing, like my legs were actually responding to commands, not just moving from memory." Her hands stilled momentarily on his back. "Really?" He nodded, almost afraid to put too much stock in the sensation. "It was brief. Might have been my imagination." "It wasn't," she said with such certainty that he almost believed her. "Your body is remembering, Jackson, healing." When she finished washing him, he turned the tables, pulling her into his lap on the wide shower chair. His hands caressed her skin with reverent familiarity, finding the spots that made her breath catch. "You should rest," she protested weakly as his lips found her neck. "This is better than rest," he murmured against her skin. Water continued to cascade around them as passion ignited, slow and tender at first, then building with increasing urgency. In these moments, his paralysis seemed to matter less, their bodies finding ways to communicate that transcended physical limitations. Later, as they lay tangled in the sheets of their bed, Leora's head resting on Jackson's chest, he found himself contemplating how much had changed in the months since she'd first walked into his mansion. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, sensing his reflective mood. "How you saved me," he answered honestly. "Not just with this treatment, but before, when I was drowning in bitterness." She propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him with those expressive eyes that saw straight to his soul. "You saved yourself, Jackson. I just reminded you that you could." "Do you ever wonder about fate?" he asked, tucking a stray curl behind her ear. "If your father hadn't left those debts, if I hadn't been so desperate for a caretaker who wouldn't quit. If you hadn't jumped into that lake," she continued softly. "If I hadn't answered Serena's call that day. So many pieces had to align perfectly." Her fingers traced the line of his jaw. "I prefer to think we would have found each other anyway, that some people are just meant to cross paths. Even a rich, bitter man and a stubborn, debt-ridden virgin." His smile took any sting from the words. "Especially them," she replied, kissing him softly. "The universe loves impossible connections." Sleep claimed them gradually, his arms around her waist, her breath warm against his neck. Tomorrow would bring more pain, more struggle, more steps on the brutal path to recovery. But tonight, in this peaceful darkness, they had already won the battle that mattered most. "Focus on the mirror," the therapist instructed. "Watch your movement." 8 weeks into treatment, Jackson stood between the parallel bars without gripping them, his body swaying slightly but holding its position. The black compression garments covering his legs concealed the electrodes delivering targeted stimulation to specific muscle groups. Leora watched from the corner, her heart in her throat. Each day brought new progress, small miracles that built upon each other. Today's challenge was maintaining balance while shifting weight from one leg to the other, a precursor to actual steps without support. "Shift to the right," the therapist directed, slowly. Sweat beaded on Jackson's forehead as he concentrated, his face a mask of determination. For a breathless moment, nothing happened. Then, almost imperceptibly, his weight transferred to his right leg. "Excellent," Dr. Sharma remarked from where she observed, tablet in hand. "Now back to center, then left." The return to center came easier, but the shift to his left, always the weaker side, faltered. Jackson's body tilted dangerously, and the therapist moved to catch him. "I've got it," he ground out, frustration evident in his voice as he fought to regain balance. For 3 agonizing seconds, he wavered on the edge of falling. Then, with visible effort, he stabilized, his left leg taking weight it hadn't properly held in years. Pride swelled in Leora's chest, nearly overwhelming her. These moments, these hard-won victories that most people would consider insignificant, had become their milestones, their celebrations. When the session ended, leaving Jackson exhausted but triumphant, Leora wheeled him back to their apartment in companionable silence. His hand rested on hers where it gripped the wheelchair handle, a gesture of connection that had become second nature. "Dr. Sharma wants to talk to us tomorrow," he said as they entered their temporary home, "about next steps. The Boston phase is almost complete." Leora nodded, helping him transfer to the couch. "Do you think she'll recommend continuing treatment at home?" "That's my guess." He pulled her down beside him, his arms settling comfortably around her shoulders, with monthly check-ins here. She nestled against him, her head finding its familiar place in the crook of his neck. "Are you ready to go home?" The question held more weight than its simple words suggested. Home meant returning to the mansion with its memories and ghosts. Home meant facing his family again, dealing with the business matters he'd put on hold, returning to the life he'd left behind, yet as someone fundamentally changed. "I miss the lake," he admitted. "But home is wherever you are now, Leora." Her heart swelled at his words. "Smooth talker." "Honest talker," he corrected, tilting her face up for a kiss. Her phone's buzzing interrupted the moment. Glancing at the screen, Leora frowned. "It's Mrs. Caldwell." The house manager rarely called unless something required immediate attention. Sensing trouble, Leora answered immediately. "Mrs. Caldwell, is everything okay?" "Ms. Banks," the older woman's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "I thought you should know your residence has had visitors." Mr. Elias's parents arrived with their attorney and a medical specialist. They were demanding access to Mr. Elias's private office and medical records. Jackson tensed beside her, having heard through the speaker. "Put her on speaker," he instructed, his expression darkening. "You're on speaker now, Mrs. Caldwell," Leora said. "Jackson can hear you." "Sir," Mrs. Caldwell acknowledged, "they presented legal documents claiming conservatorship rights due to your extended medical absence and questionable judgment. I refused them entry to your private spaces, but they're threatening legal action." "They won't get far," Jackson said, his voice dangerously calm. "My legal affairs are in perfect order." "There's more," Mrs. Caldwell continued reluctantly. "They brought a young woman with them. She claimed to be your fiancée." "What?" Leora and Jackson exclaimed simultaneously. "Clara?" Jackson ground out, the name like poison on his tongue. Leora's stomach clenched with an emotion she refused to acknowledge as jealousy. What did she want? "To support the family during this difficult time," Mrs. Caldwell replied, contempt evident in her tone. "I informed her that the only difficulty was their unwelcome presence in your absence." "What exactly did you say, Mrs. Caldwell?" Jackson asked, a hint of amusement breaking through his anger. The house manager cleared her throat. "I may have mentioned that, unlike some people, Miss Banks didn't require Mr. Elias to be fully mobile to recognize his worth, and that perhaps if Miss Clara had possessed similar insight, she wouldn't now be reduced to serving as an accessory to what appears to be a poorly conceived family coup." Leora's jaw dropped at the unexpected fierceness of Mrs. Caldwell's defense. "I also," the older woman continued with prim satisfaction, "reminded them that I have recordings of every visitor to the mansion since the accident, including Miss Clara's tearful departure speech about how she couldn't handle being tied to half a man." Despite the situation, a smile tugged at Jackson's lips. "I had no idea you were such a formidable ally, Mrs. Caldwell." "When you left for Boston," Mrs. Caldwell said, her voice softening, "I saw something I hadn't seen in 2 years, hope, not just in you, sir, but in this house." Her eyes shifted briefly to Leora. Ms. Banks brought that hope. I protect what matters to this household, and she matters. The acknowledgement, a complete transformation from the woman who had once warned Leora against getting too close to Jackson, momentarily stunned her into silence. Thank you, Jackson said, genuine gratitude in his voice. Please continue to deny them access to anything private. I'll have my attorney contact them directly. After ending the call, Jackson stared into space, his expression troubled. They're making their move. The conservatorship? Leora asked, concern knotting her stomach. He nodded grimly. They think my pursuit of experimental treatment proves I'm not thinking clearly. And bringing Clara, his jaw tightened, that's just psychological warfare. Leora took his hand, forcing calm into her voice despite the fear curling inside her. What do we do? His eyes met hers, determination replacing the momentary shadow of worry. We finish what we started here. We go home, and we fight together. Together, she echoed, the word a promise and a battle cry. Later that night, as they lay in bed, planning their return and the inevitable confrontation that awaited, Jackson suddenly stilled her strategic suggestions with a kiss. No matter what happens, he murmured against her lips, remember that you broke chains I didn't even know were binding me. Whatever freedom I find in this body, in my life, began the day you walked into my mansion. Tears pricked behind Leora's eyes at the raw emotion in his voice. We broke each other's chains, she whispered. And no one, not your family, not Clara, not anyone, will ever bind us again. His kiss deepened, conversation giving way to more primal communication. Their bodies spoke what words couldn't express, promises made in touch and taste, commitments sealed in pleasure shared and given. Tomorrow would bring Dr. Sharma's evaluation, plans for continuing treatment, strategies for confronting his family's manipulation. But tonight belonged to them alone, two souls who had found in each other not just passion or healing, but freedom, freedom that, once tasted, they would fight with everything they had to preserve. Chapter 9. Walking away. 3 months had passed since their return from Boston, 3 months of continued therapy, legal battles with Jackson's family, and moments of triumph that had once seemed impossible. The Chicago winter had melted into spring, ice giving way to new life across the mansion's expansive grounds. Leora stood at the bedroom window, watching Jackson in the garden below. He walked slowly along the stone path, using a cane for support, but moving with increasing confidence. Dr. Sharma's treatment had exceeded even her cautious expectations. Jackson had progressed from parallel bars to walker to cane in record time, driven by determination Leora had never seen in anyone before. Pride swelled in her chest as she watched him pause to test his balance, then continue without the cane for several steps before retrieving it. Each day brought new victories, each week more independence. So why did her heart feel so heavy? The letter on the desk behind her seemed to pulse with accusation. She hadn't meant to find it, had simply been organizing Jackson's correspondence while he was at therapy, but the elegant cream envelope with the return address of Elias Enterprises had caught her attention. Inside, an offer of reinstatement as CEO, contingent upon his remarkable recovery and renewed focus on appropriate company priorities. The implied message was clear: now that he could walk again, now that he was whole in the world's eyes, his family was willing to welcome him back to the fold, as if his worth had always been tied to his physical ability. Tears pricked behind her eyes as she returned to the issue that had kept her awake for weeks. Now that Jackson was recovering, where did that leave her? Where did that leave them? She loved him with every fiber of her being, that wasn't the question. The question was whether remaining in his life would help or harm him as he reclaimed his place in a world that had once discarded him, a world that would look at her, a young black woman with no fortune, no connections, no pedigree, and see only an opportunist who had attached herself to a vulnerable man. The bedroom door opened, interrupting her spiraling thoughts. Jackson entered, slightly breathless from the exertion of climbing stairs, but his eyes bright with accomplishment. "Did you see?" he asked, excitement making him boyish. 10 steps without the cane. "I saw." Her smile was genuine despite her troubled heart. "You're amazing." He crossed to her, movement still careful but steadier each day. When he reached her, his free hand cupped her face. "Only because of you." "No," she covered his hand with hers. "This was all you, Jackson, your strength, your determination." "My motivation," he countered, kissing her softly, "which was you." She leaned into him, memorizing the feel of him, the solid warmth of his chest, the subtle sandalwood scent of his skin, the gentle strength of his hands. "What's wrong?" he asked, pulling back to study her face. "Something's been bothering you for days." Sometimes she hated how well he could read her. "Nothing's wrong. I'm just tired." He guided her to sit on the edge of the bed, lowering himself beside her with only a slight wince. "Talk to me, Leora. Please." She took a deep breath, fighting the tightness in her throat. "I saw the letter from Elias Enterprises." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Ah. They want you back." "They want the old Jackson back," he corrected, "the one who existed before the accident, before you." "And you don't want that?" she asked, unable to meet his gaze. His fingers gently tilted her chin up, forcing her to look at him. "What I want is sitting right here, Leora." Her voice wavered. "You have a chance to reclaim everything you lost." "I didn't lose anything worth keeping," he said firmly. "The accident showed me who would stand by me when things got difficult. The people rushing back now that I'm walking again aren't people I need in my life. But your company, it's not just that, it's a legacy." His eyes never left hers. "What we've built is a life." Tears spilled over despite her efforts to contain them. "People will talk. They'll say I took advantage of you when you were vulnerable, that I'm with you for your money, your status." "Let them talk," he said, echoing words he'd spoken months ago when his family had first confronted them. "Their opinions matter less than nothing to me." "They should matter," she insisted, pulling away to stand. "You have a reputation to protect, a legacy to uphold." Confusion and hurt flashed across his face. "Where is this coming from, Leora? You've never cared about those things before." "Because before, they couldn't hurt you." The words burst from her with unexpected force. "When you were in the wheelchair, people pitied you too much to criticize your choices. But now they'll judge everything, including who you love." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed quickly by anger. "So that's it. Now that I'm walking, you think I'll care more about public opinion than about us?" "I think you deserve the chance to return to your world without complications," she said, each word tearing something vital inside her, "without having to defend your relationship with your ex-caretaker." Jackson pushed himself to his feet, abandoning the cane to cross to her with determined steps. His hands gripped her shoulders, gentle but firm. "Listen to me," he said, his voice low and intense. "I spent 2 years in darkness before you came into my life, 2 years drowning in bitterness and isolation. You didn't just help me walk again, Leora. You helped me live again." A sob caught in her throat. "Jackson, I love you," he continued fiercely. "Not because you cared for me when I couldn't walk, not because you found Dr. Sharma, but because you saw me, truly saw me, when I was at my worst and loved me anyway." He released her shoulders to cup her face, his thumbs brushing away tears. "I'm planning to respond to that letter tomorrow. Do you know what I'm going to say?" She shook her head slightly. "I'm going to tell them I'll consider returning under one condition, that my fiancé be welcomed as a full partner in all company and family events." Her heart stopped. "Fiancé?" His smile was tender as he slowly, deliberately lowered himself to one knee before her. From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. "I had a more elaborate plan," he admitted, "dinner on the lake, stars overhead, music. But I can see I need to stake my claim now before your beautiful, selfless heart convinces you to do something noble and misguided." He opened the box, revealing a stunning diamond ring. "Leora Banks, will you marry me? Not because I need you, though God knows I do. Not because you saved me, though you have in every way a person can be saved. But because I love you, and the only future worth walking toward is one with you by my side. Joy and fear warred within her. Your family will either accept us or lose me again, he interrupted. This time by my choice, not circumstance. The press can write whatever they want. His eyes never left hers. The only opinion that matters to me is yours. Tears flowed freely now, but something had shifted inside her, fear giving way to certainty as she looked into the eyes of the man who had become her entire world. Yes, she whispered, then louder, yes, Jackson, I'll marry you. His smile was radiant as he rose, slightly unsteady but determined to slip the ring onto her finger. Then his mouth found hers in a kiss that felt like coming home and setting sail at the same time, an end and a beginning wrapped in one perfect moment. Later that night, as they lay tangled in sheets and each other, Jackson's fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. Promise me something, he murmured against her hair. Anything, she replied, drowsy with contentment. Promise you won't run away again, that you won't try to decide what's best for me without consulting me. She lifted her head to look at him, guilt washing through her. How did you know I was considering leaving? His smile was sad. Because I know you, Leora. I know how you think, how you always put others before yourself. His fingers brushed her cheek. But you need to understand that leaving me wouldn't be a sacrifice that protected me. It would be a wound that destroyed me. The raw honesty in his voice brought fresh tears to her eyes. I promise, she whispered. No more noble attempts to save you from myself. Good, he said, pulling her closer. Because the only future I'm interested in is one we build together. As sleep claimed them, Leora's last conscious thought was of the journey that had brought them here, from debt and desperation to love and promise, from broken pieces to something beautiful and whole. Not every broken thing was meant to be discarded. Some were simply waiting for the right hands to put them back together, stronger in the mended places than they had ever been before. The glowing screen of her laptop illuminated Leora's face as she worked late into the night. Beside her, Jackson slept peacefully, unaware of her quiet movements as she slipped from their bed to complete the task that had been haunting her for days. 3 weeks had passed since his proposal, 3 weeks that should have been filled with joy, but had instead been marred by escalating pressure from all sides. The business tabloids had run stories speculating about the convenient timing of their engagement, coinciding with his recovery. His family's lawyers had sent documents suggesting she had undue influence over Jackson while he was medically compromised. Worst of all had been yesterday's confrontation with Clara at the charity gala, their first public appearance together. The woman's words still echoed in her mind. How clever of you, Clara had whispered while Jackson was speaking with donors across the room, securing your position while he was vulnerable. But he's walking now, regaining his place in society. How long before he realizes he doesn't need his nurse anymore, before he wants someone who understands his world? Leora had held her ground then, but later she'd seen the sideways glances, heard the whispered comments, gold digger, caretaker with benefits, wonder how long that will last now that he's back on his feet. With each barb, she'd watched Jackson's jaw tighten as he defended her, saw how these attacks drained the joy from his eyes that had only recently relearned how to hope, which made what she was about to do all the more painful. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she finished the letter. Every word had been carefully chosen, every sentence measured for maximum impact with minimum cruelty. But there was no kind way to say goodbye to the man who had become your entire world. My dearest Jackson, by the time you read this, I will be gone. Please understand that this isn't a rejection of your love or a denial of mine. It is instead the purest expression of how deeply I love you. You are a man reborn. Each day you reclaim more of your strength, your independence, your rightful place in the world, a world that has rules and expectations I cannot meet, no matter how much we might wish otherwise. I was here to heal you, to serve you in your darkest hour. That was my purpose, and now it is fulfilled. You no longer need a caretaker. You need a partner worthy of the man you are and the life you deserve. People will call me a gold digger if I stay. They will whisper that I manipulated you when you were vulnerable. Those whispers will follow you into boardrooms and benefit galas, undermining the respect you've worked so hard to rebuild. I refuse to be the shadow that dims your light. Know that I love you more than I have ever loved anyone or anything, that I am better for having known you, stronger for having loved you. The time we shared was a gift I will cherish until my last breath. Be magnificent, Jackson Elias. Reclaim your world and reshape it as only you can. And someday, when you find someone from your world who loves you as you deserve, think of me kindly. Forever yours, Leora. She read it once more, tears blurring her vision. Then she printed it carefully, folded it, and slipped it beneath his pillow, where he would find it in the morning. The engagement ring caught the moonlight as she removed it from her finger, placing it atop the letter. Its weight had become so natural in the past weeks that her hand felt strangely light without it. Moving silently, she gathered the small bag she had packed earlier and took one last look at the man who had taught her what love truly meant. In sleep, his face was peaceful, unburdened by the pain her absence would bring tomorrow. "Goodbye, my love," she whispered, allowing herself one final moment of weakness before squaring her shoulders and walking away from the only true happiness she had ever known. She was doing the right thing, the noble thing, giving him freedom to reclaim his life without the complication of defending their relationship to a world that would never truly accept it. So why did right feel so devastatingly wrong? As the mansion door closed behind her with quiet finality, Leora Banks stepped into the pre-dawn darkness alone, leaving behind not just the man she loved, but the future they had planned and the pieces of her heart she knew would never be whole again. Chapter 10. Beyond Forever. Emptiness greeted Jackson when he woke, his hand reaching instinctively for Leora, only to find cold sheets where her warmth should have been. His eyes opened slowly, adjusting to morning light streaming through windows she always opened before he awoke. "Leora," he called, pushing himself up. Silence answered, broken only by distant birdsong from the garden. Something crinkled beneath his pillow as he shifted. Frowning, he reached under to find a folded paper and his heart clenched, her engagement ring. Even before reading a single word, he knew she was gone. His hands shook as he unfolded the letter, each carefully written word a knife to his chest. By the time he finished reading, tears blurred his vision, anger and desperation warring within him. "No," he whispered, then louder, "no." He pushed himself from the bed, movements clumsy with emotion rather than physical limitation. Without bothering with his cane, he stumbled to the closet, yanking it open to confirm what he already knew. Her clothes were gone, not all of them, but enough. Enough to know this wasn't impulsive, but planned. Mrs. Caldwell appeared in the doorway, drawn by his shout. Her expression confirmed his fears before she spoke. "She left at dawn," the older woman said softly. "Ask me not to wake you." "Where did she go?" Jackson demanded, voice raw. "She wouldn't say." Mrs. Caldwell's eyes held unexpected compassion. "Said it was better this way." "Better?" Rage surged through him, hot and clarifying. "How is this better?" He thrust the letter at Mrs. Caldwell, who read it with deepening lines between her brows. "Oh, that foolish, noble girl," she murmured when she finished. "She truly believes she's protecting you." "From what? Happiness?" Jackson ran a hand through his hair, mind racing. "Call Serena. She might know where Leora would go." As Mrs. Caldwell hurried to comply, Jackson dressed with furious efficiency. The physical therapist had taught him to manage without assistance, but it was Leora's quiet encouragement that had made him master each button, each shoelace, each small independence with determination rather than frustration. Now that same independence allowed him to prepare to go after her. "Serena hasn't heard from her," Mrs. Caldwell reported when she returned, "and she's not answering her phone." Jackson nodded grimly, having expected as much. Leora was nothing if not thorough. "Have security check local hotels, bus stations, the airport." He grabbed his wallet, keys, phone. I'll start with her old apartment building. The neighbors might know something. Sir, Mrs. Caldwell said hesitantly, perhaps you should give her time, let her come to her senses on her own. Time. Jackson looked at her incredulously. Every minute she spends believing that leaving me was the right choice is another minute I have to undo, another minute she suffers alone for no reason. Understanding dawned in the older woman's eyes. You really do love her. More than my next breath, he confirmed, moving past her toward the door. And I'm not letting her sacrifice our happiness for some misguided notion of what's proper. Hours melted into days as Jackson searched relentlessly. Leora's old apartment had new tenants who knew nothing. Her former co-workers hadn't heard from her. Serena, though initially resistant, eventually joined his search out of concern for her friend. 1 week became 2, then 3. Jackson barely slept, driven by a fear that grew with each passing day, that Leora truly believed she was doing the right thing, and that distance would only cement her resolve. He was in his home office, reviewing security footage from bus stations for the 100th time, when the solution struck him with such clarity he actually gasped. Of course, he whispered, reaching for his phone. It's the only way. The pieces fell into place rapidly after that, calls made, arrangements set, a plan formed from equal parts desperation and determination. If Leora wouldn't let him find her, he would make it impossible for her not to find him. Are you ready, Mr. Elias? The production assistant's voice pulled Jackson from his thoughts. He nodded, straightening his tie one last time. As ready as I'll ever be. The stage lights were blinding as he walked out without a cane, each step deliberate but steady. The audience applauded exactly as coached, though they had no idea why this wealthy businessman had requested a segment on the nation's most popular morning talk show. Welcome, Jackson Elias, the host greeted warmly. America's been quite curious about why you requested to be here today. Thank you for having me, Sophia. Jackson settled into the chair opposite her, his expression composed despite the nervous energy thrumming through him. I'm here for one very specific reason. Your recovery has been remarkable, Sophia noted. From what I understand, doctors once said you might never walk again. They did, Jackson confirmed. And they would have been right if not for one person, the woman I love. A ripple of interest moved through the audience. Leora Banks came into my life when I was at my lowest point, he continued, his voice steady despite the emotion behind his words. She was hired as my caretaker, but she became so much more. She found the treatment that helped me walk again. She stood by me through every painful step. She taught me that my worth wasn't tied to my physical ability. The audience was silent now, captivated by the raw honesty in his voice. 3 weeks ago, I asked her to marry me, and she said yes. He paused, emotion threatening to overwhelm him. The next morning, she was gone. She left a letter saying she was leaving to protect me from gossip, from judgment, from a world that might look down on our relationship. He pulled the letter from his pocket, holding it up. She wrote that people would call her a gold digger, that they would say she took advantage of me when I was vulnerable, that her presence in my life would somehow diminish me. Taking a deep breath, Jackson looked directly into the camera. Leora, if you're watching, and I pray that you are, I need you to hear this. You were never my caretaker. You were my salvation, not just because you found Dr. Sharma or helped me through therapy, but because you loved me at my worst, because you saw strength in me when all I saw was brokenness. His voice cracked slightly. You think you're protecting me by leaving? But you've taken my heart with you. Without you, these legs that can finally walk have nowhere worth going. The audience was utterly silent now, many wiping away tears. I don't care what anyone thinks of our relationship, he continued passionately. The only opinion that matters to me is yours. The only future I want is one we build together. Rising from his chair in one fluid motion, Jackson approached the edge of the stage, his movements confident despite the absence of his cane. So I'm asking you one more time, in front of the entire country, Leora Banks, will you come home? Will you marry me? Not because I need you, though God knows I do, but because we deserve the chance to love each other without fear or shame." The camera panned across the audience, many openly crying now at the raw emotion in his voice. "I will search for you forever if I have to," he promised, "but please don't make me wait that long." Leora stared at the television in the small motel room, tears streaming down her face. She hadn't meant to watch, had actively avoided media of any kind since leaving, fearing precisely this, that Jackson would try to find her. But the maid had left the TV on when cleaning, and she'd walked in just as his segment began. Now his words echoed in her mind, breaking down the walls of resolve she'd built. "You were never my caretaker. You were my salvation." Her phone, the new one she'd purchased after leaving her old one behind, rang suddenly, startling her. Only one person had this number. "Did you see it?" Serena's voice came through without greeting. "I saw," Leora whispered. "Then what the hell are you still doing hiding in New Orleans?" her friend demanded. "That man just declared his love for you on national television." "It's not that simple, Serena." "It is exactly that simple," Serena interrupted. "He loves you. You love him. Everything else is just noise. People will talk. People will always talk. That's what people do." Serena's exasperation vibrated through the phone. "But girl, they're already talking. The difference is, right now they're saying you broke his heart and abandoned him, which is way worse than saying you're after his money." The truth of her words hit Leora like a physical blow. "I thought I was protecting him," she whispered. "By making you both miserable." Serena scoffed. "Some protection." Silence stretched between them as Leora stared at the television, now showing commercials, but with Jackson's face still burned into her vision. "He looks thinner," she finally said, voice breaking. "He's been searching for you non-stop," Serena replied, gentler now, barely eating, barely sleeping. "Just like you, I'd bet." She was right. Leora had lost weight, dark circles permanently shadowing her eyes from nights spent staring at the ceiling, questioning her decision even as she convinced herself it was right. "What if I go back and it doesn't work?" she asked, voicing her deepest fear. "What if the world tears us apart anyway? What if it doesn't?" Serena countered. "What if you're throwing away the greatest love of your life because you're scared of what might happen?" The question hung between them, unanswerable yet demanding an answer. "The car is waiting outside," Serena said before hanging up. "Your choice." Leora sat frozen, phone still in hand, as the minutes ticked by. Through the thin curtains, she could see the black SUV Serena had mentioned, Jackson's doing, no doubt. He had found her after all, or perhaps he had always known where she was and was simply giving her the space to make her own choice. Rising on shaky legs, she moved to the bathroom, staring at her reflection. 3 weeks of heartache had left their mark, her eyes dulled by sadness, her skin lacking its usual glow. Was this the cost of noble sacrifice, this hollow shell of the woman she had been? "Enough," she whispered to her reflection. "Enough running." 20 minutes later, she stepped outside, a small bag containing everything she had taken when she fled. The driver opened the door silently, his face revealing nothing as she slid into the back seat. "Where to, Miss Banks?" he asked simply. She took a deep breath, release and return wrapped in 4 simple words: "Take me to Jackson." The mansion loomed before her, unchanged, yet somehow different. Perhaps because she was different, no longer the desperate girl who had first arrived seeking employment, nor the woman who had fled, believing sacrifice was love. The driver opened her door. "He's in the garden, Miss Banks." Of course he was. The garden had become his sanctuary during recovery, the place where each small victory was celebrated. Her legs felt leaden as she walked the familiar path around the house. What if he had changed his mind? What if the public declaration had been a moment of passion he now regretted? The questions dissolved when she saw him. Jackson stood by the lake, his back to her, staring out at the water that had once changed his life. He wore no suit today, just simple jeans and a sweater that emphasized the weight he'd lost. Even from behind, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the slight tilt of his head that always betrayed deep thought. "Jackson," she called softly. He turned slowly, as if afraid she might be a mirage that would vanish if he moved too quickly. When their eyes met across the garden, everything else fell away, the weeks of separation, the pain of absence, the fear of the future. All that remained was the simple truth neither could deny any longer: they belonged together. Neither could later say who moved first. Somehow the distance between them vanished, and she was in his arms, his face buried in her hair, her tears soaking his sweater. "Don't ever leave me again," he whispered fiercely, "not for my own good, not for any reason." "Never," she promised through tears. "I'm so sorry. I know what you thought." He pulled back just enough to frame her face with his hands. "And I love you for wanting to protect me, but Leora, don't you understand? You're not an obstacle to my happiness. You're my happiness." His words broke the last of her resistance. "I watched your interview," she admitted. A smile tugged at his lips. "I hoped you would. Was it too much?" Serena said go big or go home. "It was perfect," she admitted. "Humiliating, but perfect." "Good." His thumbs brushed away her tears. "Because I meant every word." From his pocket, he withdrew her engagement ring. "This belongs on your finger, not under my pillow." She extended her trembling hand, watching through tear-blurred vision as he slipped the ring back into place. It felt right in a way nothing had since she'd removed it. "I still don't have all the answers," she confessed. "People will still talk." "Let them," he said simply. "Their opinions matter less than nothing. The only voice I need to hear for the rest of my life is yours." His kiss was homecoming and promise, forgiveness and future. When they finally parted, both breathless, he pressed his forehead to hers. "Marry me," he whispered. "Not someday, soon. Tomorrow, if I could arrange it." She laughed through her tears. "Serena would kill us if we didn't let her help plan a proper wedding." 2 weeks, then, he countered, just enough time for her to work her magic, not enough time for you to change your mind. "I won't change my mind," she promised, "not ever again." The wedding was everything they hadn't known they wanted, intimate yet joyful, elegant yet warm, held in the mansion's garden where they had reunited. It included only those who truly mattered: Serena as maid of honor, Dr. Sharma, who had flown in specially, a handful of friends who had stood by Jackson after his accident, and, surprisingly, Mrs. Caldwell, who had somehow transformed from disapproving observer to fierce advocate. Noticeably absent was Jackson's family, who had responded to the wedding invitation with a formal letter from their attorney, threatening to contest Jackson's control of his shares if he proceeded with this ill-advised union. His response had been succinct: an invitation to attempt it, along with evidence of their own financial improprieties he'd uncovered during his time away from the company. They hadn't replied since. As Leora walked toward him in a simple but stunning ivory gown, Jackson felt a sense of rightness that transcended all the pain and struggle that had brought them to this moment. She had become his true north, his reason for fighting through the darkest days of recovery. Their vows were personal, heartfelt promises that acknowledged both their journey and their future. When the minister finally pronounced them husband and wife, the small gathering erupted in genuine celebration. Later, as they danced under stars strung with fairy lights, fulfilling the promise Leora had made months ago in Boston, Jackson held her close, marveling at how perfectly they fit together. "Happy, Mrs. Elias," he murmured against her hair. "Beyond happy," she replied, tilting her face up to his, "though I'm thinking of hyphenating. Banks Elias has a nice ring to it." "Whatever you want," he said, meaning it completely. "As long as you're mine." "Always was," she whispered, "even when I tried not to be." As the music shifted to a slower rhythm, Jackson led her to a quiet corner of the garden, away from their guests. From his pocket, he withdrew a small envelope. "A wedding gift," he explained, handing it to her. Inside, Leora found papers for a foundation, the Banks Elias Rehabilitation Trust, dedicated to funding innovative treatments for spinal cord injuries and supporting patients without financial resources. "This is incredible," she breathed, understanding the magnitude of what he had created. "It's your vision," he said simply. "You saw possibility when no one else did. Now others will have that same chance." Tears gathered in her eyes as she looked up at the man who had become not just her husband but her partner in the truest sense. "I love you, Jackson Elias. And I love you, Leora Banks Elias." His smile held all the promise of their future, beyond forever. 1 year later, afternoon sunlight spilled through the windows of their cozy lakeside cottage, not the mansion where their story began, but a new home they'd chosen together, smaller, warmer, free of past pain's echoes. Leora stood in the doorway of the nursery, one hand resting on her rounded belly, watching as Jackson adjusted a handcrafted mobile above the second crib. His movements were fluid, confident, physical therapy now a routine rather than the focus of their lives. "The doctor said you shouldn't be climbing ladders," she teased, her voice more affectionate than scolding. "That doctor also said I shouldn't have run that charity 5K last month," he countered, securing the mobile's final string. "Yet here I am, defying expectations." She smiled, watching him descend with care, not from weakness, but from awareness of the precious life she carried. The news of twins had been a joyful shock 4 months ago, especially after Dr. Sharma's warnings about potential fertility challenges from Jackson's injury. He crossed to her, gently placing his hands on either side of her belly. "They're active today. They know their father's voice," she said, covering his hands with hers. "They get excited when you're near." His eyes, meeting hers, held none of the shadows that had once darkened them, only wonder and a love that had deepened with each challenge they'd overcome together. "The foundation approved 10 new patient sponsorships today," he said, referring to the Banks Elias Rehabilitation Trust they'd established, including 2 single mothers who reminded me of someone I know. She leaned into him, heart full. Their work supporting spinal injury patients without financial resources had given purpose to their story in ways neither had anticipated. "Have you decided on names?" he asked, guiding her to the window seat they'd built specifically for these quiet moments. Leora's hand moved in slow circles over her belly. "I'm thinking Nia for our daughter, after Dr. Sharma." "Nia Banks Elias," Jackson tested the name. "Perfect. And for our son?" "Not Leonard," she said softly, having reconsidered her initial thought to name him after her father. Jackson set down his tools, crossing to kneel before her. His hand joined hers on her stomach, just in time to feel a strong kick. "Nia and Ethan Banks Elias," he murmured. "Perfect names for our perfect beginnings." As twilight gathered outside the nursery windows, they remained that way, hands joined over the new lives they had created, hearts full with a love that had overcome every obstacle placed in its path. From caretaker and patient to husband and wife, from brokenness to wholeness, their journey had been anything but easy. Yet every struggle had been worth it for this moment, this proof that some love stories weren't just meant to be told, but lived, not with one life, but 2, twins, a perfect symbol of the love that had finally, truly been reborn.